Well, time is ticking, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, a very, very warm welcome. My name is Virginia Haussegger and I'm the director of the 50/50 by 2030 Foundation. And I want to thank Hugh, who has put that together for us, who has done it voluntarily. We get a lot of volunteer support and I'm so incredibly grateful. And to Mary for ensuring that all our figures were right. If you were shocked by the figures you just saw, then you should be, because they are quite shameful. As you would have seen, since 2006, Australia has slid down the Global Gender Gap Index every year bar one. And to sit at 39 out of 149 nations, when we sit number one in the world for equality of education, really does make no sense. Now, I will keep moving quickly because we have a lot to get through tonight. And of course, we all want to hear from our very important guest, Dr. Anne Summers, and I have plenty I want to discuss with her, and I know there'll be questions from the floor. But first and foremost, it is my great pleasure to invite Auntie Ros to the stage to give us the formal welcome to country. Please welcome Auntie Ros.
Hi everyone. Firstly, I acknowledge the Ngunnawal people and the United Ngunnawal Elders Council. I also acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and non-Indigenous friends here today, this evening. A special acknowledgement to Deputy Vice-Chancellor Lee Sullivan, Anne Summer, AO, and Virginia Haussegger, AM. I also acknowledge the Wiradjuri Echoes, Duncan and Lorraine Smith and their children. As a recipient of the 2004 International Women's Day Award, I am honoured to be here to welcome you to Ngunnawal country. The Ngunnawal people pay our respect to our traditional neighbours, the Gundungurra to the northeast, the Walgaloo to the south, the Wiradjuri to the west, the Yuin to the east, the Ngarigo to the southeast. Our neighbours were welcome to Ngunnawal country to participate in ceremonies, including sharing of knowledge and sustaining law, culture and community. For non-Indigenous people who are not aware, welcome to country is an ancient Aboriginal protocol that ensures your spirit is protected whilst on another person's traditional land. It is the elders who welcome you and pray for your safe journey during your time on country, whether it is for a short stay or for a lifetime. Welcome to Ngunnawal country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Auntie Ros, and thank you also to the Wiradjuri Echoes, who we saw perform out in the foyer there. I always so love watching that family perform. International Women's Day 2019, the theme is Balance for Better, Together Better. There are actually, to be quite honest, a number of different themes that are being used for International Women's Day 2019, but in essence, it's all about working together, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I also would like to extend a very warm welcome to Professor Lee Sullivan. Lee is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research at the University of Canberra, and I've asked him just to say a few words of welcome.
Well, thank you, Virginia, and I've taken note of a few words, and I just have a couple. I'd certainly like to thank Auntie Ros for your welcome to the country, and also the continuing contributions to the culture and the enrichment of the country in which the University of Canberra is on, and that is the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal Nation. Distinguished guests, respected colleagues and friends, and what a full house today. This is an amazing turn-up. On behalf of the University of Canberra, I'd like to extend my warm welcome to you all on the eve of the International Women's Day. It's a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women, and also it's really a call to action for further advancement in terms of gender parity. I'd like to acknowledge the organisers, the 50/50 by 2030 Foundation, under the leadership of Virginia Haussegger AM, and with the support of a veritable who's who list of supporters of leading people that are contributing to Australian society. This is a bold initiative of the University of Canberra under the Institute for Governance and Policy Analysis. So this was established in 2017. And it has a singular dedication, and I better get this right, to developing evidence-based theory and leading practice on the role of women in strengthening public administration, improving governance, and supporting the participation of men to inform and shape a national culture of gender equity, diversity, and inclusion. The University of Canberra is certainly deeply committed to progressing both equity and diversity. Just one example before I go. We're very proud that in 2018, the University of Canberra was awarded its 12th consecutive citation as an employer of choice for gender equity by the Workplace Gender Equity Agency, but we still know there's a lot of distance to travel. But enough about the university. I'm especially honoured today to welcome tonight's distinguished guest, Dr. Anne Summers, AO. I'm sure that Dr. Summers needs no introduction, but it would be certainly remiss of me not to acknowledge the trailblazing efforts of Dr. Summers in terms of gender equity, and also to note that this trailblazing has been especially effective and I think most recently demonstrated by yesterday's impactful presentation at the National Press Club. So I could not actually imagine a more accomplished and more distinguished guest to join with us today in conversation with Virginia. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Sullivan. It's lovely to have you here, and he was also joined us yesterday at the Press Club. There are many people I would like to thank for coming along tonight, but I'm just going to send out a warm thank you to all of you. It's so lovely to look around the room and see so many colleagues and friends who've come to join us today. Our work at the 50/50 by 2030 Foundation has relied very heavily on the support of others, the encouragement of others, and as Professor Sullivan says, we're very, very lucky to have a distinguished advisory council who keep egging us on to do what we do. One of the things that we did last year was a major piece of research. When we launched the foundation at the end of 2017, one of the first areas that we started looking at was the big knowledge gap in our understanding in Australia of gender attitudes, what Australians really think about gender equality. So we set about trying to fill that gap by doing one of Australia's first national surveys of gender equality and attitudes around that. And Dr. Pia Rowe, who was one of the researchers on this project, is going to tell us about that in a moment. But once the report was released late last year, like many reports, I always fear that academic reports or reports in general don't get read. So we've been agitating, Pia and I, for some time to see if we could break the report down into a snapshot of our key findings. But we needed someone to help support us do that, to actually pay for it. And we were very lucky to get some support from Sarub Anand. Now, Sarub is the CEO and founder of TAP, which is the architecture practice. Now, it's got nothing to do with building houses. It is, in fact, all to do with integrating business and ICT. And ICT, of course, is one area in which women really struggle to take those leadership positions. So we were delighted when Sarub came to us and said that he would support us in producing a document which is on your seats, which is the snapshot, the key findings of our report. So I've asked Sarub to come along tonight and say a few quick words. Sarub.
Evening, everyone. I'm Sarab Anand. I'm the founder and the CEO of the architecture practice, and I'm more than happy to support 50/50 Foundation and take it forward. As Virginia mentioned, we look at IT and strategy for government and private organizations. We've been running this company for 5 years out of Canberra, so our head office is here. So we're local, and we're trying to do our best to make sure those figures improve. Yeah? I was personally shocked when I saw them as well, and if that helps, my CFO is a woman, and we're trying our best wherever we can to make sure that's the case. The problem in IT is there's not many women in there, and I think we need to change that. Yeah. And the University of Canberra can absolutely help in that case. Yeah. So without talking too much about TAP, we're here to help, essentially. On behalf of the architecture practice on the eve of the International Women's Day, we welcome tonight's distinguished guest, Dr. Anne Summers, AO. As everyone in this room knows, gender equality continues to be a pressing issue in Australia and globally. TAP as we're known. People don't know us as the architecture practice, they know us as TAP. TAP is passionate about working towards a fair and more equitable future, and we're delighted to partner with 50/50 by 2030 Foundation at the University of Canberra to advance this issue. On your seats, as Virginia mentioned, there is a brochure there with a national snapshot of Australians' attitudes toward gender equality. And if you've had a chance to look at it, you can see that we've got a lot of work to do in that space. I welcome Dr. Pia Rowe from the 50/50 by 2030 Foundation to say a few words about the brochure. Thank you.
Now, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Pia Rowe. I'm from the 50/50 Foundation, and I'm very conscious of the fact that I am the last person standing between you and the main event, so I'll make this really brief. I just wanted to take this opportunity to quickly talk about the work here at the 50/50 Foundation. We were established a couple of years ago, in September 2017, and we have a very clear vision of what we want to do, and that's basically to have parity in leadership roles and all key decision-making roles by the year 2030. We are, as everyone has already acknowledged, we are very lucky that we have the support of all these amazing people behind us to do this. But having said that, it's so easy to say that we have this goal that by 2030 we want to see parity in gender equality. But actually doing that in practice is such a different story. And this is basically what initiated this research in the first place. As Virginia already mentioned, when we first started, we started compiling all the data, seeing what was out there, what we knew about gender equality, and we did find this massive knowledge gap when it came to actual Australians' attitudes towards gender equality. And without knowing how people really feel and think, we just knew that we wouldn't be able to reach our goal. So we set out to do the first national survey of its kind. We break down the data, not just by gender, but also by generation. And the results, some we were expecting to see, quite a few of them actually took us by surprise. Here's just some of the key findings. Look, I don't have time to go through these in any great detail tonight because, we want to get to the main event. But if you look at these, for example, we have nearly half, or 42% of all men think that gender equality strategies do not take them into account at workplace. Almost similar figure feel that, political correctness gives women an advantage now. And this compared to what we know, what's happening with statistics in other areas, these give us a great cause for concern. So what we want to do now with this data, we want to take this further. So we now have a good snapshot of what's happening in Australia. And we want to advance this by actually now starting focus groups, getting deeper into that, why this is happening. So we know what is happening. The next step is really establishing why this is the case. Just quick words about the foundation in general. We have a flagship gender equality blog called Protogender. This is where we put the whole world under the gender lens. We want to see research, we want to see what works, what people are doing, current commentary, things like that. And our main sort of aim is to bridge the gap between academia and the mainstream. And we do welcome contributors from outside of the academia, so if anyone wants to put the pen to paper and start writing, please do get in touch with us, because we would be delighted to publish some of the commentary from externals. We also, every Friday, we compile all the gender news that have been happening. Now, media is getting a really noisy place. It's almost impossible to keep on top of everything that's happening. We make the job really easy for everyone. We curate a list of the week's most important gender news, and we'll send it to your inbox every Friday. So please go to our website, protogender.com.au, and do subscribe to our gender news. And I promise it's only a once-a-week email, and we do never ever spam. So that's basically all from me from tonight. And now please welcome Anne Summers and Virginia Haussegger.
Thank you very much, Pia. And as you can see, the research is really worrying and troubling. And I might even touch on this with Anne at one stage. But ladies and gentlemen, Anne Summers doesn't need a big introduction. Everyone, I would like to say, everyone knows Anne Summers' background. But in a nutshell, I'd like to say she is a woman who has had more diverse careers than any woman I know in Australia. As editor of magazines, founders, owners, a media proprietor, a media entrepreneur, journalist, writer, author, of course, bureaucrat, policy advisor, head of Office of Status of Women, etc. And even then moving on to become the head of Greenpeace International. Anne Summers has had an extraordinary career, and without wanting to sound cliche, it is also the career of an incredible Australian trailblazer. And on top of all of that, she's also had her beauty visage on an Australian stamp. So I think you really made it when you get to that point.
Yep. Everyone licking you?
I hadn't thought about it like that. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks very much.
Yesterday, we had a very important event at the National Press Club. For many, many years, I've been wanting to get Anne to return to Australia. Anne is now based in New York, and wanted to see her make a national address at the Press Club for a number of reasons, but one of them in particular is because that, of course, is an historic thing to do, in that once you've done it, the transcript lives forever, the broadcast lives forever. And I'd been speaking to Anne for some time, many months actually, about the issue around the representation of women in politics. And knowing she is the most forensic journalist I've ever met and ever will meet, I knew that she would do an extraordinary job, and boy oh boy, she did. Yesterday's address will be talked about, I believe, for years and years. And I hope that in decades to come, young students, when they are studying that address, will be saying, oh my God, was it really like that? In a nutshell, and I don't want to dwell on the address because it has had a lot of coverage in the media, but in a nutshell...
And people can read it.
And people can read it.
Yeah.
You can read it on Broad Agenda. You can certainly watch it on iView right now. But in a nutshell, one of the takeouts from it was your message around the Liberal Party not having a women's problem, but in fact having a problem with merit and misogyny. So I want to pick up on this issue of misogyny. You, of course, wrote a book. I happened to pull it out this morning and realised it's quite well read. I'm not kidding. That's the way it looked. But the first post-it note I've got on the first page is in capitals, what is misogyny? Can you define for us, what are you talking about when you say something as tough as that at the Press Club, that the Liberal Party is misogynist?
Look, it's very, very simple, Virginia. Misogyny is hostility and hatred hostility towards women. It can be hatred of women. But what I've argued in that book, The Misogyny Factor, and what I've certainly, the definition I used yesterday at the Press Club, the misogyny of the Liberal Party is about excluding women from positions of power and authority, and in this case excluding women from being members of Parliament. And what the case that I tried to set out and I think documented is that the Liberal Party is not only failing to recruit women at anything like the rate of other parties, it's actually ditching women, it's getting rid of them. And the numbers of women on the Liberal Party side have gone down markedly in the past 6 or 7 years, and they're about to go down a lot more after this next coming election. There'll be at most 12 Liberal women in the federal parliament after the May election. There will be probably 47 Labor women. So the difference could not be more stark. And you can say they've been careless, they forgot to choose women, they didn't get their pre-selection processes right, they've been meaning to get around to it, they haven't had time, all these excuses that we keep hearing. No, they don't want them. They don't want us. They do not want us, and they've made it abundantly clear, even as recently as 10 days ago, there was a by-election in Stirling in Western Australia for the seat vacated by Michael Keenan, who was one of the rats leaving the sinking ship. It's a marginal seat, not sure that they can hold it. In a swing towards the government, they would hold it, but in the probable swing to Labor, they may not hold it. But nevertheless, it's an important seat. There were 4 female candidates and 1 male candidate. Now, guess who won? And not just any old man, military background. That's what they favour. Military background or IPA, they're the only men people that get into the Liberal Party these days. So the base of the party and the disposition of the members of the party is getting narrower and narrower. And part of the, if you like, the ideological makeup of people from that narrow base is not one that is friendly to women, by and large.
Okay, well, I'm very much looking forward to your commentary as we head towards an election. But I want to go back now to 2012 and Julia Gillard and that speech, October of 2012. Australia hadn't been accustomed to using the word misogyny at all until that time when that speech was made, and quickly went around the world, went viral very quickly, was seen by millions and millions and referred to as the misogyny speech because she used that word.
Yes.
Now, I also recall at the time I was in the newsroom and was stunned that she used that word because my understanding of it was woman hater.
Mm-hmm.
Was she using that word? And I ask you this because I know you've spent a lot of time studying Julia's, not only the speech, but what happened to her in office as Prime Minister. Was she using that word in its true form as hatred?
But when she first used it, I think we all sort of went, remember I got journalists ringing me up and saying, it couldn't be misogyny, that's too strong, hatred, that's not like, it's not like that. And so I certainly went off and looked at the dictionary and then looked at how it might apply. I think what she meant, and certainly the way I came to view the word, is it's hostility. It's hostility expressed by wanting to exclude women. And in her case, the hostility was a manifestation of people, a shamefully large number of Australians, not being able to accept the fact that we had a woman leading us. And that we just, we loved her when she was deputy. When she was number 2, she was fabulous. We loved Julia Gillard, the Deputy Prime Minister. For a couple of weeks after she became Prime Minister, we thought it was fabulous. We were so proud of ourselves. We've finally done it. But then something changed. It turned. And I think that misogyny means, hatred is a way of expressing it. But I prefer to use the word hostility because I think that's really a more accurate representation of what people are feeling. They don't like it. They're hostile towards the idea of a woman. It might be any woman. It might be that particular woman. They're hostile to the notion of women being in places where we don't belong. And so the manifestation of misogyny is to try and force the woman out.
Okay.
And there are various ways of doing that, of course, as we know.
Indeed. Julia Gillard is a really interesting example of an interesting process of transformation when it comes to feminism. Now, I won't dwell too much on this because I want to get to your book, but this has bothered me. I interviewed Julia many, many years ago when I was writing a book myself, and she wouldn't, back in 2004, she wouldn't talk about feminism. She actually wouldn't talk about it. And believe me, I tried very hard. And that's why I was really interested in your book on the misogyny factor when you pointed out during the Rudd-Gillard government years, you actually point out where that government in fact let women down significantly. And I just want to quote a couple of pieces to you, and because I was reminded of this today. But during the Rudd-Gillard years, you say there was a clear opportunity for the incoming Labor government to reset the policy agenda. Now, you were talking after Howard had rewound back a lot of important policy.
Yes.
But the Howard years, to try and undo the damage of the Howard years and to return to the trajectory of progress for women's equality that had been started by the Whitlam government. But you go on to point out with a number of examples what they didn't do and how disappointing that was. And then you say, why is it that when it comes to a key plank in the equality project, this government, a Labor government led by a woman, is so timid? Now, isn't that quite difficult to reconcile, that here she was in a leadership position and in fact not only not waving the flag for women, but not doing much when it came to women's policy?
I think there's a lot of disappointment at Gillard when she first took over the job. As deputy, although as deputy, she and Jenny Macklin did work together to get us paid parental leave, and that was a massively important reform that Australia had with the United States, the only 2 countries in the OECD didn't have it. So that was very, very important, and I think they deserve credit for that. But I think with Gillard, and I think you could see the same thing with Hillary Clinton when she was initially running the first time in 2008, that they were fearful. They thought if they identified as, if they thought they could pretend they weren't really women, that they wouldn't be punished for being women. And it was both Gillard and Clinton, I think, in their own way, learnt the very hard way that you can't do it. You know, they're not going to let you get away with it, you might as well own it. And Gillard came to that recognition, and I mean, you can...
But she came to it quite late in the process,
She did,
though.
but as Prime Minister, she did. I mean, you could see the way it was, you could track it, and you could also see the way in which the press gallery responded and scolded her for it and said, oh, you'll regret this, girlie, and she did. But, you know, it was judged to be a political error to play the gender card, you know, or the woman card.
But isn't it interesting that then when she did resign, when she was knocked off, in her that press conference the next morning, that's one of the most memorable quotes from that press conference, is when she referred to gender and said it doesn't count for everything, it doesn't count for nothing, it counts for something.
Yes,
and it's up to the community to have a
Yes.
sophisticated discussion about
those
what that
shades
means.
of grey, yes. Well, I think that she, you know, she's been a kind of a trailblazer, if you like, in the long, painful understanding that we can't run away from it. I mean, I think we shouldn't want to run away from it, and there's no point in running away from it. You are a woman. You are a woman in politics. There's going to be a certain price to pay. But, you know, I mean, one of the things I'm so thrilled about at the moment, there are 6 women now running for the Democratic nomination for president. And so having so many women changes everything. You know, and at least 4 of them are really credible, you know, candidates who, any of whom could actually get there and do the top job. And so once women are no longer isolated, once it's no longer just the one who is such a target and so vulnerable, and all of her faults are magnified and all the rest of it. When there's 6 of them, well, you know, this one's too timid and this one's too nice and that one's got kids and that one hasn't and this one's got a dog and, you know, there's millions of things to say about them, but it's a diffused conversation. It's going to be really fascinating, I think, to watch the trajectory over the next, well, firstly into the primaries and see where we go, but over the next 2 years and see how the conversation goes and how the reporting goes towards these women and about these women. And I do hope that we might be getting a little bit more sophisticated. But I do think, you know, I was very critical and of Julia Gillard and very upset that she wasn't more courageous. But it's hard to be too condemnatory because it was a very big calculation for her, and I think she calculated the wrong way. But when she did change, she got hell to pay.
Yeah, but I guess because she had spent so long refusing to wave that flag and to talk about gender, it seemed like a really sudden turnaround. And as you know, there were other circumstances at the time when she made that speech that made the press gallery argue that in fact she was using it as a bit of a cover for other issues. But
I think they were wrong. I think they were wrong. They called it wrong.
I want to take you to, and then before we get onto your book, but just lastly on Gillard, your Newcastle speech, which looked at the incredible, deeply personal sexism that she encountered, the visual material that was produced around her. In fact, Anne had to make her address R-rated to put it online.
Well, I published 2 versions, a vanilla version and an R-rated version, and gave the adequate warnings that if you read the R-rated, you're going to be possibly offended. I also had an X-rated appendix with that really, really bad stuff. But just letting people know that what they were going to see was, because most people hadn't seen it. Most people had no idea that this stuff was circulating really widely around the Australian community and was building up, attitudes of hostility and contempt for her. And none of us knew where it was coming from. And once you started to see this stuff and know that it was, on office emails and going around to thousands and thousands of people, you started to understand why there was no respect for her when you started seeing these disgusting pictures and, without even getting to Larry Pickering and drawing her naked with a dildo. I mean, that was...
I was shocked. I thought I'd seen the worst of them until I went through your speech, and I was really shocked at what I hadn't realised how bad it had got. I want to ask you, what do you think allowed that to happen? Because that material, and it was graphically pornographic, and it wasn't just Julia Gillard, a few other women in leadership roles were copped as well.
Nova Paris copped it.
Yep, and in the Governor-General at the time as well.
Yes.
How do you think that happened and no one called it out? Journalists were seeing it, no one was talking about it or reporting it. No one reported it to the police, for example. What was going on there?
Well, I mean, I think that staggered me was that I discovered that Pickering was sending these cartoons on almost a daily basis to every member of Parliament, federal Parliament. And when somebody drew them to my attention, then I rang up a few MPs and said, are you getting this stuff? Oh yeah, I just delete them, they're horrible, I delete them. I said, well, I just found it extraordinary that no one in the press gallery had learnt about them and thought it worthy of a story. It was Gillard herself who first disclosed at a press conference, I think a couple of weeks before I gave my speech, that there was all this, I think she's called them right-wing nut jobs on the internet or something, who were doing disgusting cartoons, and I think she may have even made a reference to Pickering. But she called it out, and there was still, the gallery didn't pick it up. So I can't really answer your question because I don't know. I mean, I just would I like to think if I'd been in the gallery at the time, I would have heard about it, because you talk to MPs all the time and they tell you things, and I would like to think that I would have thought it was a story worth reporting.
Let's jump forward to when you were in the gallery, or actually jump back, I suppose. When you first joined the press gallery as the bureau chief for the Fin Review, there was you and Michelle Grattan.
And Gay Davidson.
And yes.
Gay Davidson of the Canberra Times.
From the Canberra Times, of
Yes.
course. But obviously you were completely outnumbered by men. What surprised me in Unfettered and Alive, your book, was how, despite having, at the time, you'd done a PhD, you'd produced Damned Whores, a book that had been really well received, you were considered a great superstar already, and yet when you took that job, you express in your memoir how much you felt ill-equipped to do it, and unqualified, and how nervous you were. What was that about?
Well, I don't think writing a book about women in Australia necessarily qualifies you to be a daily journalist in Canberra writing about politics. I mean, I had been a journalist on the National Times for 4 years or so, and done a lot of writing and a lot of groundbreaking stuff, and I was very proud of what I'd done, and I thought I could do anything. And fortunately, so did my boss, Max Walsh. But I mean, he had more confidence in me than I had in myself at that time, because one, I'd never worked in Canberra, I'd never worked in daily reporting, I'd been in a weekly, and I'd never written about politics. And here I was going to be writing on the front page of the Fin Review every day. I mean, big scope for failure there. And I, in fact, did do a couple of stories that were so embarrassing to think about them.
I think we've all done those.
I know. Well, the good thing about daily papers is, it's
Fish
gone.
and chips the next day.
Yes. But I think that's why I didn't feel that I was not going to do it. I didn't run away. I didn't give up. But I was scared because I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
There's a line where you say one of your colleagues said, "I can see the terror in your eyes. You need to bullshit your way through as everyone else does."
Well, that was very reassuring to learn that.
But were the rest of them bullshitting their way through, and was there something to do with female insecurity there?
Possibly. I mean, that's one of the questions I asked. I don't know whether my insecurity. I wouldn't probably not have characterised it as female insecurity, because I thought I was a very confident sort of person, but I was also a realistic person, and I had to be realistic about the fact that I didn't know anything about this world. But I guess Max Walsh's confidence in me was he had seen the way I had adapted to writing about police corruption and prisons and all sorts of other subjects about which I knew nothing before I went into them, and he thought I could take that same kind of approach to federal politics and maybe cover it a bit differently from the rest of the gallery, which is what I tried to do. So it was really just learning a new environment, but you're under such public scrutiny the whole time, and you've not just got your readers looking at you, on the front page of the paper every day, but you've also got the Prime Minister, who happened to be Malcolm Fraser, not exactly the friendliest of Prime Ministers, and his whole press people, his press secretary and all their people after you for every single thing that you wrote. So, and as you know, they went after me and tried to sort of run me out of town. It was quite a tough world.
There have been a number of times in your very, very career and stellar career where you have felt that people have come after you and, as you just said, run you out of town. You've said that a number of times, and I've got to say, in reading your memoir, I was really surprised at how often you express, well, doubt in yourself, not fear, but a sense of being ill-equipped to do a particular job, doubt in yourself, and also a sense that you're on your own and that others are gunning to get you. I think that came through particularly, I think, when you went to the States and got involved with Ms. Magazine in particular. So can we just leap forward to that time? First and foremost, what took you to the States and how did you get involved in Ms. Magazine?
Well, I was already in the States because I was working for Fairfax. I'd been working in the Office of Status of Women for 3 or 4 years, and I would have stayed there, but I was approached by Fairfax and offered this job of running their North American bureau based in New York, and that to me was irresistible because I'd always wanted to live in New York, and the few times that I'd been there and tried to stay there, I wasn't brave enough to live in New York without a job. I felt I had to have a job and income, and so here they were offering me a job, offering me money.
Was the Office of the Status of Women job, though, which you were the first to run that office, was that
No, I wasn't the first. I was the first to run it in the new, revamped version and the new name, but the office had been basically set up under Whitlam, because when Liz Reid, who was the advisor to Prime Minister Whitlam, was moved from his office to the department, and they set up a little secretariat there, that evolved into the Office of Women's Affairs.
That became an enormous job, but was that not strong enough or powerful enough to hold you? You wanted to go back to journalism?
I wanted to go to New York.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough.
It turned out the job I took in New York was not all that flash, and I love living in New York, but the job turned out to be quite unsatisfying. And after a year or so, I was thinking, maybe I've made the wrong call. Maybe I should go back.
Why was it unsatisfying?
Well, first of all, Americans aren't the slightest bit interested in Australia, so it's very hard to get anyone to talk to you. I mean, even the State Department, Australia Desk guy didn't want to talk to you. I mean, it was just really hard to get interesting stories. So, I mean, most journalists in that situation would kind of fall back on, aren't Americans stupid, aren't Americans ridiculous, those kind of stories. And I didn't want to do those sort of stories because I know enough about America, not see America that way. I think it's a very complex, interesting place, and there are a lot of things wrong with America, and I'm more interested in trying to understand them rather than make fun of them. So that route didn't exist. And also, by the time I was in New York, in the old days, the foreign correspondents would just get hold of the New York Times and rewrite the front page and send it back. But by the time I was there, the New York Times would actually arrive by cable in Sydney before we got to see it in New York. So that option was also gone. So you actually had to come up with real stories. And it was much harder than I thought it would be because people didn't want to talk to you. And so I just found, I did do a lot of stuff, but I did some big interviews because Bob Hawke, when I left Canberra, had given me some introductions to, Paul Volcker and Caspar Weinberger and people like that. So that was very good. But I just found that very frustrating because I wanted to do sort of a level of journalism that I was used to doing that I couldn't do in New York. So I was feeling very frustrated and thinking about whether or not I should go back when Sandra Yates, who I didn't know, but she was a woman who had worked for Fairfax on the magazine side of things, I was on the newspaper side, arrived in New York, and she had been given a brief by Fairfax to come to New York and start a magazine for teenage girls based on Dolly. And you probably all know Dolly magazine. Very, very successful magazine for teenage girls in Australia. I don't think it's going anymore, but it was, had a very...
It was my Bible. We had to hide it from the nuns at school.
Well, there was nothing like it in America, and Sandra had this, very brilliant insight that, Fairfax could go over there and start an equivalent of Dolly and, fill this niche in the market. And it was a brilliant insight, and it was very, very successful. So when she first arrived in New York, she came to, because I was the head of the bureau as a North American manager for Fairfax. My job was to help her find premises and help her do everything. And so I was doing that and thinking, oh, well, she's doing this really exciting stuff and I'm doing this really boring.
Can I just check though, at this point you had worked, run the office for the status of women?
Yeah, that was behind
So you
me.
had that background behind you?
Yes. This was 1986, or seven maybe. And one day Sandra took me to lunch at a bistro on West 43rd Street called Cafe Un Deux Trois, and she said, Doctor, she always called me Doctor, I've just found out that Ms. Magazine is for sale and we're going to buy it.
Why not?
Okay. And we're going to get Fairfax to buy it. She said, we're going to get Fairfax to buy it and we're going to run it. And you're going to be the editor and I'm going to be the publisher.
Now, that's the perfect job for you. It must have seemed at the time.
Well, it was certainly better than what I was doing at the time. Anyway, I mean, it happened. It happened very, very quickly, and Fairfax did agree to buy Ms., and I did become the editor-in-chief, and we started Sassy, and we revamped Ms., and we're trundling along very, very nicely. We've been going for a couple of months, and I was just bringing out the first issue of the revamped Ms. magazine under my direction when young Warwick Fairfax came along and blew up Fairfax. He did this bid to take the company private, which in itself was controversial enough and was extraordinarily destructive. But about a few weeks after he announced that bid, there was this huge stock market crash and everything just blew up. So he decided that he was going to have to sell all of his overseas properties. They owned the Spectator magazine in London, they owned a whole lot of papers in New Zealand, and they owned Ms. and Sassy in New York. So we found out that we were for sale. And again, Sandra, who was the very kind of gutsy, much more business-oriented person than I am, she said, okay, she got on the phone and she negotiated an option and said that we had 5 weeks to raise the money to buy them ourselves.
So you and she needed to raise, was it $20 million?
$20 million.
Capital raising.
$20 million.
You went...
Which was a lot of money back then.
So I love the story about, well, it is a lot of money, but I love the story about, to go down to Wall Street to start doing the rounds of talks to raise this money, the first thing she made you do was go and buy a big red suit.
She said that people don't lend money to people who look like they need it. And this is very true. So, I went on...
So you got the big shoulder pads.
I went and got an Anne Klein. I had a personal shopper. I got this Anne Klein red suit, big shoulder pads, very short skirt, an Armani blouse to wear under it. It was absolutely fantastic clothes. She got herself a Valentino suit, and we looked amazing. I'd never spent that much money in my life. I didn't know you could spend that much money on clothes before then. I've since learnt that it's fairly normal, but... we got these outfits, and I just said to her, my God, I can't believe we've spent this money, and I've spent this money. And she said, Doctor, we're either going to do this deal, or we're going to be the best dressed bag ladies in New York. And it ended up actually being both.
Well, but before you became the bag ladies, you did do the deal. You did get money.
We did raise the $20 million.
Yeah,
we did it. We bought the
buy
magazines. We created a company called Matilda Publications, and we were the co-owners of it with capital from a couple of banks. And we had this glorious career. We called ourselves Mogulettes, and not because we were women, because we were small.
So media mogulettes.
Media mogulettes. So I've got a chapter in the book called Media Mogulettes in New York City, and just detailing our glorious career as media owners.
Can I jump in at this point though and ask, well, so it didn't last, but ask you about Gloria Steinem, because certainly when I heard, and I was very young at the time, but when I heard that you were taking over Ms. Magazine, that was the most exciting news in the world, because that was the feminist icon.
Bible.
And Gloria Steinem was also this amazing icon. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with her? Because again, I was surprised by a lot in this book, but surprised that when you first met her, that you had this beautiful line about how she threw her megawatt smile at you and said, we've never met before, but I feel like I know you. And the way you described that meeting, that you locked eyes, in fact, you actually locked horns with her.
Well, not initially, but I mean, she said, we've never met, but I feel we know each other because we're both members of the Revolutionary Government of Women in Exile. I thought that, well, that's a very strange way of putting it, but we're here to, possibly buy the magazine that has been her life for 15 years, and she can't have been feeling too happy about it. But anyway, she said she welcomed us with open arms because we were real feminists with real money. And that was very welcoming of her, and I thought everything was going to be fine. I should have realised, I think I was remiss in not realising that she couldn't actually ever give it up, even though she sold, it wasn't actually her magazine. She was the public face of it. I assumed she was the editor. She wasn't. She used to sort of flit in and out, and she was always there to write cover stories and raise funds and what have you when they needed it. But she wasn't actually running the magazine. They had a foundation running the magazine, and there was an editorial staff who did all the work. But Gloria was the public face and always associated with it, and she certainly saw it as her property, her emotional property at least. And she had founded it, and it was her. But I should have realised that despite her having sold it, and I have to say that it was in such dire financial straits that it would not have lasted another month if we hadn't come along. It was in such incredible debt, and they had completely run out of opportunities to raise more money. So we came along and bought it. They paid all their debts. Gloria and Pat Carbine, who was the publisher, were both put on retainer to us and paid quite a lot of money per year. And that was, Gloria and I used to have breakfast or lunch about once a week and talk, and everything seemed, and she took me out, to nightclubs, and, I was part of her gang for a while, and that was all very fabulous.
So what happened though? Because
walking down the street with Gloria Steinem is an amazing experience. And going to Nell's nightclub, no waiting in the street behind the room, straight to the VIP room. It was fabulous.
But when it came to the 40th anniversary of Ms. Magazine, it was quite sad the way you described going along to that event, and you and she didn't talk, and you felt like a bit of an outsider, I think. What was that about?
Well, I think what happened is that she never reconciled herself to losing the magazine. She thought that she could control it through me. And she thought that, I was a real feminist with real money and I'll just pay the bills, but I would be so in awe of her and that I would basically, do what she wanted. And I wasn't like that. And so we gradually, had started having some arguments. We also ran into huge financial difficulties, and I guess that was very painful for her because she, had 15 years of financial difficulties, and she didn't want to have to kind of relive those, even at second hand. But it all blew up with a big story that I wanted to do on I don't know how much time we've got to tell the story, but
Not long.
No, okay. Well, a story about domestic violence where she and I took diametrically opposite sides, and she said, she couldn't bear the fact that Ms. Magazine would publish the stories that I wanted to publish, and I said, well, that's what's always been wrong with Ms, that it's just always shied away from confronting real issues and treating women like adults with complex views and different diverse views rather than these idealised creatures who could do no wrong.
The actual issue there was fascinating, and ladies and gentlemen, you'd have to read about it in the book, so I'm going to jump forward though. But so you did have a falling out, but then the other great feminist icon in the US, Susan Faludi, when she wrote Backlash in 1991, she was quite critical of you.
Not critical, malicious, lying, completely misrepresenting everything I had done.
Who says women at the top don't love each other? This stuff about queen bees, it's nonsense. No, I'm being facetious there. But
I was totally shocked, this book, because I'd been interviewed by her and she and I had these chatty letters, we were good friends, and, I'd signed the release, and, so the book arrived, and I was just beyond shocked when I read what she wrote about me. I could not believe that she would be so... First, she's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist with the Wall Street Journal. I couldn't believe she could get it so wrong, that she could be not only so inaccurate, but so maliciously wrong, and accuse me of having done things that I didn't do.
You did ask for an apology. Did you ever get it?
No, I didn't ask for an apology. I asked for it to be... I didn't have the money to sue, but what I did do is I had a lawyer's letter sent to Random House, the publisher, and at first they said, no, I'm not going to do anything, and it turned out a lot of other people had similar complaints. This book was a very flawed book. So they made a lot of changes to it. So its subsequent editions, all the paperback edition and all the international editions were changed, toned down quite a lot, not nearly enough to my satisfaction. I still think the version that's out there is very cruel and very inaccurate, but a lot of changes were made. The publisher said to me, "Oh, Susan, can't believe you're upset about this. She's really, really sorry, and she's going to send you a letter of an apology." And I didn't ask for that, but it never arrived.
When you came back to Australia...
So far it hasn't arrived. I mean, she's still got time, I guess.
When you came back to Australia, I think pretty bruised by that whole experience, and I think emotionally, and you even say physically, worn down by it. And you went and stayed with your mum, and then you get a phone call from the ABC, Prue Howard, and her opening, and she wants to interview you, and so you agree to do it. And her opening
No,
night,
I don't agree. What's happened is I'm in bed asleep, and the phone rings. And back in those days, the phone was in the next room, and you had to walk over and pick it up and answer it. And my mother answered, of course, and she said, "Oh, Anne, it's the ABC." I said, "Well, who are they?" "I don't know. You've got to come." If it had been me, I would have, but mothers being polite people. So I sort of staggered out there very groggily because I was half asleep, and there was no, I picked up the phone, it was Prue Howard, no introduction, no nothing. She must have done all that while I was walking to the phone, and she just said to me, "Well, Anne Summers, what does it feel like to be a failure?"
This is the woman who went on to become Minister for Women in New South Wales, mind you. But
She ran the Office of Status of Women. She was the Sex Discrimination Commissioner.
She was. So again, harping on failure. How? And you did admit though that you felt really, somewhat traumatised by what you'd been through.
Well, I think because I'd let a lot of people down. I mean, people lost their jobs. We had to fire a lot of people. All of the promises that we'd made and the expectations that we had, and Sandra and I really believed that we could save MES. We really did think we could, and we put a lot of heart and soul into it. And the thing that was most heartbreaking is when Fairfax put us on the block, and every media organisation in the country, from the New York Times to Hearst to Condé Nast to Rupert Murdoch, everybody wanted to buy Sassy, and they were willing to pay big dollars. So we could have made millions and millions of dollars and walked away, and but none of them would take MES. And she and I said, "No, you can't have Sassy if you won't take MES." So we, went to the wall to save MES, and it was very, very bitter pill to swallow that we weren't able, in the end of the day, to save her.
How did you then rebuild your career and move on?
Well, I decided to stay in New York, and I was going to try and rebuild myself as a magazine writer in New York, and maybe try and get some newspaper opinion writing. And it's hard, and I wanted to do a book. It's very hard there because practically everybody in New York has the same ambition, so there's a lot of competition, a lot of really, really talented writers. So I'd been doing that for about 3 years, and just starting to make a little bit of progress. I still hadn't cracked the New York Times, but I was getting nice letters back from them, so I felt I was getting close. And I was working with a book agent. I had a book proposal that, book proposals in the States can take 5 years to develop before you even get to the stage of pitching it to the publisher. I was working on that. So I felt I was getting somewhere. And then I got this phone call one night from Don Watson, who'd just been hired as Paul Keating's speechwriter. And he rang up, he said, "Well, and Paul's got a bit of a problem with women, and we want you to come back and help."
A problem with women.
And the lawyers wanted to take that out of the book. I said, "No, that's what was said."
Of this book?
Of this book. The lawyers said, "No, you can't say that because Paul might sue us because we're accusing him of sexual harassment."
Sexual harassment? That's ridiculous. Was he upset by it?
No. Well, if he was, I haven't heard, and I think I would have.
I'm sure he'd let you know if he was upset. Just jumping forward, and the problem with, talking to you is that there's so much ground to cover and we can't cover it all and we're going to have to move forward. But just in a nutshell, what did you learn by working with Paul Keating? What did you learn from him?
From him? So much. I mean, it was just I was there for 11 months only. It was a very, very short time, but we did so much in that time, and it was so interesting, so exciting. I've never before worked in a ministerial office, prime ministerial office, and learning the power of that office and what you can actually do was phenomenal, and knowing how to use it, and we did achieve a lot. We did some incredible things. including developing a whole new childcare policy, which I was so heartbroken when John Howard ripped it up. We did a lot of really good things. You know, we got childcare seen as economic policy. You know, we had, I mean, I can't even go through the whole list of things now, but I learnt that he was very receptive to these things. He was, you know, reputed to be very, you know, anti-female and all the rest of it. And in fact, he'd never really thought about a lot of these issues. And once you know, he's a very rational, engaging person. And once you sort of sat down and talked with him about them, you know, he was very receptive. He also has 3 daughters, and he was starting to, you know, he was starting to think
Yeah, but
about...
Tony Abbott had 3 daughters as well.
I know, true.
And a mum.
True.
And a wife.
True, and a dog, yeah, true. But I guess that, I mean, the key moment probably in my time working for him was an event that was held at the State Theatre in Sydney 2 weeks before the election, called the Arts for Labor event. And it was... the arts community basically wanted to put on, because you know, everyone thought Labor was going to lose, and they wanted to put on an event to thank him, to thank Paul for what he'd done, in particular to thank him for the creative fellowships which he had established when he was a treasurer. And these were fellowships, I think it was $65,000 a year to mid-career or mature artists in all sorts of fields, musicians, writers, directors, what have you. And they became known as the Keatings. And, you know, every sort of key artistic person in Australia had a Keating. And they cost $11 million. And the work that came out of that, you know, it was just so extraordinary. That day at the State Theatre, when he came in, he was defeated. He walked in like this. And he said to me, "Annie, I haven't got a speech in me." I said, "Sit down. They just want to, you know, thank you." So he sat down, and the show was just so fantastic. And it just lifted him, and he sort of bounded up onto the stage afterwards and didn't use Don's speech. He just sort of gave this amazing speech from the heart about the arts, Indigenous Australia, Asia and the economy, and just tied it all together in a view of what this country is and what it could be that I had never heard before. And I decided at that moment that I was going to stay in Australia. Listening to him, it was just so extraordinary, and how he had it all together. He said, you know, this mob, the Liberals, they don't understand this. They don't understand any of this. They wouldn't have got this concert. They wouldn't have. And he said, whenever we were cutting budgets, didn't matter what else we cut, we never touched the arts, because a society needs the arts. You know, it's the glue that holds it all together. And I mean, it was just so. I felt so privileged to be there to hear. This man articulate this vision of a kind we've never had since, and that we could so desperately do with now. It was phenomenal, and it just gave me heart.
You did stay in Australia,
Yeah,
and moved into the role as editor of Good Weekend.
Yes.
And look, I'm going to have to try to cut this short, but as I say, there's too much of your life story to really
Read the book.
cover it. Just read the book. But I wanted to say, in a nutshell, you had an amazing time as editor of Good Weekend, but you also had a really difficult time where you were involved in some legal action and...
It wasn't legal.
I didn't become legal action. Okay, accusations, or the media came after you.
There was a rumour going around that I only took about 2 weeks before I heard about it. A rumour going around the media circles that I was going to be accused of sexual harassment by one of my staff members.
And wouldn't that have been a headline?
Well, it certainly was when it came out, yes. Yeah, perfect. I mean, to this day, I don't know exactly what happened, but I do think it was confected and designed to drive me out.
You dealt with it, and with, again, the details, read the book, but you dealt with it, but the question I want to ask you, and then I will throw this open to the audience for questions, but, you know, your career is, as I said earlier, it's a stellar career. It is one of the most amazing careers I've ever read about, because you turn corners constantly. Just when something gets really difficult, really tough, or you know, as you said, you're traumatised, you're physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted, you then seem to reinvent yourself time and time again. But one of the things that struck me in reading the whole book, and I had to read it quickly because I couldn't put it down, was not only the number of times you reinvent yourself, but the number of times you doubt yourself too, and that you actually express that. And you ask, what am I now? Who am I going to be now? So I hate the word resilience when it's used on stage.
Me too.
But I want to ask you, how do you manage to keep reinventing yourself? You're almost like a square peg that's never quite fit in a round hole, or you do for a little while and then you move on because you seem to be intent on doing your own thing.
I guess
How do you keep
I'm just
reinventing?
surprised that so many people have made this point that they are surprised that I have written about failure, that I've written about doubt, that I've written about my fears, my insecurity and so on, as if you shouldn't talk about them. You should pretend these things don't happen when all of us have these feelings. I mean, there isn't a single person in the world who doesn't have feelings of doubt and insecurity and, wondering if they can do a certain thing, whether it's a job or whether it's, a relationship or whatever it is. So I just felt, that it wouldn't be a complete book if I wasn't honest about my reactions. And to me, the important thing is not how you feel, but how you deal with those feelings and how you overcome them. And you only overcome them by doing it. You have to sort of force yourself and you make yourself do it. And people say, how do you do it? Well, I don't know, you just do it. You just do it. And it's like, putting one foot in front of the other, you actually are walking. How do you walk? You put one foot in front of the other. And so I think with all of these things, and if something's if you're not happy, you should move on. And I've certainly done that plenty of times, and I've failed plenty of times. And you keep going. You keep going.
I want to throw it open to questions because I have, of course, gone way over time. It's very hard not to. Mary's got a couple of microphones. If you have a question, I think Hannah does too, pop your hand up. But just while a microphone is travelling down to Brett, down here, I'm going to ask you just lastly on the issue of, it's not reinvention, but power. When you took over as head of Greenpeace, which was a whole another job environment for you, you've got a really beautiful quote about David McTaggart, who wanted to take Greenpeace.
He founded Greenpeace.
He founded Greenpeace and he wanted to make it global.
He founded it was there was one in Canada, one in America, and one in Britain. But he came up with the idea, for Greenpeace to really be effective, it needed to be a global organisation. So he came up with the concept of Greenpeace International, which is the body that I chaired. He created that.
And the way you describe the way he performs is really interesting in terms of power. And I just want to read this. You say, because he was a very effective communicator, and you say, how is it that some people are able to draw on capacities that most of us doubt we have? Could we in fact do the same if we really wanted to? What do you think the answer to that question is?
Well, I think we probably could. We have to find it within ourselves. We have to be bold. And we have to be willing to take risks. And if you're taking risks, you have to be willing to fail. And you will fail many times. But that just kind of makes you, you learn from that and you keep going. So I just think that, my personal mantra, which I'll be talking about tomorrow on International Women's Day, when particularly for young women, my personal mantra is 3 things you need to do, you need to know. Be bold, work hard, have fun. That's it.
Well, you've certainly lived by those, particularly work hard. We'll take a question from here.
Hi, my name's Blair Williams. And first of all, I want to thank you so much for the research that you've done, particularly your 2012 speech. It inspired me to do my own research in this area.
Good.
And I'm nearly finished my PhD on the gendered media representation of women prime ministers.
Oh, great.
So following from that, I'm really interested in your opinion, because of your speech yesterday, which I didn't see, but I read on the Broad Agenda website. There's a little spruik.
Thanks, Blair.
I'm interested in your opinion on the political affiliation of both the media as well as a woman politician or prime minister, and whether that has an effect or an influence on the kind of representations they receive. For example, would a Liberal woman prime minister experience what Julia Gillard did? Do you think that has anything to do with politics or is just context?
I don't think it would be any difference. It's hypothetical because it hasn't happened, but I don't think that it's a partisan thing. I think it's a gender thing, and I think that a Liberal female Prime Minister would have had a very similar reaction, particularly if she'd been single, childless, deliberately barren, atheist, you know, Julia kind of, you know, stacked up the qualities that gave people ammunition. I often used to think, well, if our first female Prime Minister had been Quentin Bryce, you know, married, 5 children, Methodist, you know, Queensland, academic, lawyer, you know, if it had been her, would she have been treated the same? We'll never know, but I suspect, you know, she would have still been treated badly, but maybe the ammunition might have been a little bit different. They couldn't have got after her for being deliberately barren or for not, you know, for being an atheist, but they probably would have found something else. So I don't really think, you know, that we're going to get over this until that more and more women are doing. Once it becomes normal for women to be leading countries and leading organisations, and then I think it'll start to dissipate. But I don't at the moment think it's a partisan thing.
We've got a question.
Mind you, there haven't been very many Liberal women doing it, so, you know, we can't really test the hypothesis.
Just on that issue though, Julie Bishop's an interesting example who, very unlike Julia Gillard, she right from the outset has embraced her femininity. She's made a real show of being a fashion icon, the shoes, the outfits, the ball gowns, what have you. Just throwing back to what Pia said earlier about our research, when we're looking at attitudes around gender equality, one of the things that really shocked us was the very high rate of men who believe that women try to behave as men when they get into executive positions or leadership positions. Julie Bishop didn't do that. Did that work against her?
Well, I'm not sure that I can answer the question quite the way you framed it, but one thing I would say, when she now says that, you know, if she had been Prime Minister, she could have beaten Bill Shorten, I don't know what she bases that on, because she has not acted in the past few years like somebody who wants to be Prime Minister. I don't think if you want to be Prime Minister, you don't hang out at, you know, with Anna Wintour and go to the races in your Fascinator and go to balls and, you know, fly up to London for a fashion show and all the rest of it.
Yeah, but it helped her get the popular
and never
vote.
ever give a speech on a policy matter, never express any views on anything of substance that might qualify you as a leader. So, you know, I think if you want to be a Prime Minister, you've got to start by looking like one and behaving like one, and she didn't do that.
But she had the popular vote.
Really? Did she?
Well, apparently.
That
Well,
court-
yeah.
I would like to test
not
that.
again. Well, according to
I would like to test that. Okay, well,
Okay.
I would still like to test that, because she might be very popular because she's pretty, or she's popular because of... But is she popular as a Prime Minister? I don't know.
No.
I don't know. I don't know. All I'm saying is that every time I saw her in the paper, she did not look to me like a potential Prime Minister.
But is that because we're so used to seeing Prime Ministers wear suits because they're men?
That's not the only reason.
Interesting. We could debate this for hours. We have a question.
I know I'm a sceptic in the Julie Bishop town, sorry, but...
That's okay, Anne, I'm with you. My name's Peter Swarbrick. I'm actually from Canberra Women in Business, and I'm very big on, hoping women can improve their influence and their confidence and move into politics, because until we have equal representation, we don't have a hope in hell. Question. So we're talking about working within systems, Labor Party systems of preferences and, you know, getting up on the ballot and being pre-selected, same with Liberal Party. We're seeing some commentary about, you know, at the end of the day, ladies, just chuck your bikes in the bush certainly the Liberal Party, and become an independent. Do you feel that it's worth us bashing our heads against the wall within the current systems? Or do you think that we're more likely to, you know, get up in politics and have more influence on the outside as independents? I don't know if you've read Jessa Crispin's book, but basically she says feminism and capitalism are natural enemies, and we just have to burn the whole thing down.
It's going to work well, isn't it?
I mean, if you were a conservative woman, you know, a woman of conservative political inclination, and you wanted to go into politics, I think, you know, the options are very tough at the moment, because I mean the track record of the Conservative parties, you know, it's not something that's been happening just for a couple of years. It's been happening for a long time now, and it's getting worse. It's getting markedly worse, and I don't care what Scott Morrison says about his U-Butte, you know, 7 women member cabinet, you know, half of whom are going to leave in a few weeks' time. The bald facts are that they make it extremely difficult, and they are making it, I think, even more difficult at the moment for women to get into politics. And when they do get in, they treat it pretty badly. So I guess if I were an ambitious Conservative woman, I'd kind of go the Karen Phelps or Julia Banks route and you know, for the crossbench, you know, see what it looks like in a few years' time.
We had a very interesting blog written by a male writer, actually, on this very issue and the rise of the women independence and why. It's worth having a look at. Okay. Last question just from here.
My name's Caitlin. I am an ambitious and passionate public servant who's currently on maternity leave. I'm having conversations with my return to work
at the moment. And
Caitlin, can you just repeat what you said?
My name is Caitlin. I'm a passionate and ambitious public servant, and I'm currently on maternity leave, and I'm about to go back to return to work, and I'm having conversations with my employers, and basically they don't know what to do with me. They're not sure. They kind of asked me to sort of answer the question for them. The question being, my job is my job, and I thought that was kind of the conversation we were having. Turns out we weren't having that conversation. And I'm not...
Also, a matter of the law.
There is the matter of the law, of course. And I guess that's my question, is at what point is it my responsibility to fight the fight for everyone else, or just sort of make it easy for myself and essentially find another job, basically, move on because I'm unhappy and potentially I don't want to go back to that workplace? Or do I stand up and say, all right, because this is an important issue and you're treating me abominably, do I make a stand now? When do I make the stand and when do I sit back down?
Well, only you can decide that. I mean, you decide whether you're up for the fight. If you don't like the job, you don't want it, well, but you probably answered the question. But if you want the job and you're fighting for yourself, you're not fighting for other people, you're fighting for yourself. You are legally entitled to go back to that job. If they're not offering it to you, they're in breach of the law. If you don't want to go back to it, well, that's your choice. If you have other options, you have to weigh them up. But I think, when it comes to should we be pioneers for our sex or should we look after ourselves, I mean, you hope these two things aren't going to be in conflict, that every time we achieve something, it should be a benefit to other people, because if we, one little barrier gets broken, or, one situation starts to become normalised that once was seen as, unique or unachievable, that's good for everybody. But, I mean, only you can decide what you want to do.
Good luck,
Good luck
Caitlin.
with it, yes.
Good luck. Unfortunately,
I really want to know what department, but I suppose I'm not allowed to.
No, I was wondering that too, but I can't help but add this. We do a lot of work across the public sector, across the APS. There are some wonderful people and some great work being done, particularly around gender equality, in various places, various pockets. If the place you are isn't working for you, I'm sure you'll find one that will, because some good things are happening. Unfortunately, we are going to have to wind it up, because I'm not looking at Mary, because I know she's very upset that I've gone completely over time. And we have champagne, we have drinks, we have food, and we really want you to stay for that. But I just want to wind up by saying, Anne, in a nutshell, what next for Anne Summers?
Oh, well, I have some big plans.
Can you share them?
No. Not yet.
Not yet,
But I do hope that I'll be able to tell you something terrific, in a few months. Big.
Australia-wide or elsewhere? Oh, God.
I think all of these issues that are important to us are global issues. I think, I'm an Australian. I understand Australia more than I understand anywhere else, so I expect I would end up working here. I'm living in New York at the moment. I'm not going to be there forever, but I can't tell you exactly when I'm coming back, because I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, well, this is pretty exciting. I didn't know any of that. That's very, very exciting.
It might work out, so I'm not going to talk about it until I know.
Yeah, but if it doesn't, whatever it is, you'll just go on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing.
So, yeah.
And hopefully we'll be asking you when you're 95, so what next, Anne? Ladies and gentlemen.
I think I'll go into pension.
No, you won't. No, you won't. You might redesign the pension or something like that, but you won't be. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please give a very warm welcome to Dr. Anne Summers.